Hello and welcome to my final vlog for SAC 7108, centred on the coaching process. This vlog features a young rugby union athlete who unfortunately developed an inguinal hernia and as such had surgical intervention to repair the structural damage. The coaching session joins the athlete 4 weeks post-operation. The focus of the session was a reintroduction to running demands and was inclusive of a warm-up, some movement prep, with the introduction of some low-level plyometric work and some running mechanic drills. The footage that I reflected on was when coaching the A-skip, which is a great exercise to enforce and develop the technical demands of running, but also provides exposure to stretch shortening cycle mechanisms of the lower limbs. The coaching behaviour that I reflected on was my verbal delivery of coaching information. I analysed this with two main questions in mind. What verbal communication led to successful movement outcomes, and how could this verbal communication be improved to facilitate more effective coaching? I will play the footage uninterrupted and subsequently review and reflect on its delivery in an attempt to answer these two questions. So here it is.
We're going to develop all these little components into the A-skip. Okay, so the A-skip sort of replicates that, and running mechanics, we've done a high march hold, we've worked on them, that spring action of your calf, so we're going to roll that all into one movement now. Okay, so it's single leg contact, get a good arm swing, yeah. Got a double rebound that we're looking for on this stance leg is a nice triple extension. Okay, so your calf slapping into the ground, nice forceful contact, push off the ground, yeah. You're going to be straight calf, straight knee, straight hip. On the other side again, you've got good swing leg recovery, so there's a high knee drive, and that foot is coming up your leg, it's not coming out. So imagine there's a marker pen on the inside of your shoe, and you're drawing a line up that straight leg. Okay? And then it is a double contact. And that first contact is your forceful one, second contact is the rebound. Okay? So just want to do that on the spot. That's it. Nice forceful first contact. Good. Your arms are swinging up, your shoulders are nice and down, nice and relaxed. Good. Keep going. Good. And bring that down there. Okay, so what I want you to do is next set, I want you to stay nice and tight in here. Okay, your shoulders are nice and relaxed. That first contact, which you slam into the ground. Okay, so the more you slam into the ground, the more you can spring back off. Okay, so forceful contact into the ground. Nice straight stance leg on that first contact. That second one, you rebound in and then you set it again. Snap. Tendency, you're going to have your shoulders are going to start arching back a little bit, okay? So forward momentum, your shoulders are over your hips, or if not, if you feel a little bit more comfortable, just slightly in front of your hips. So we're going forwards all the time. So you're going to do that, you're going to wind that up stationary, and then we're going to start moving, okay? Start moving forwards. Snap, nice and tight, breathe. And off you go, start driving forwards. Snap it, forceful contact, off the ground. Good. Alright? Yeah, good. I just think that first contact can be a bit sharper. Yeah, get off the ground. You want you to be nice and springy off the floor. Okay, so as you hit the ground, you've got pretty much straight leg. It's that calf, there's that spring doing the work. Okay, so we can have another go. Better, good. Nice, keep going. Good arm swing, good. Good. It's a really good triple extension there, yeah? Really good sharp contacts, good arm swing. And good sort of upper trunk position as well.
Firstly, when analysing the athlete and the outcome of the movement, it is evident that the coaching intervention was successful and that motor learning had occurred over the course of the session. Although some technical components could still be optimised, such as more efficient hip extension and a better arm swing, the results of the coaching were good considering the athlete had limited exposure to the drill previously. When analysing my verbal communication as a coach, there are a number of features involving my use of instruction and feedback that may have led to these successful outcomes. I believe one of the main reasons for successful intervention was the method of compartmentalising the drill, which later facilitated my verbal instruction on different body segments. Broadly speaking, we moved from part practice to whole practice. Whilst we started with the stationary A-skip, we then moved on to the whole component of the movement. Further to this, I broke the movement down specific to the limbs with explicit instruction regarding the stance leg, the swing leg, the arms and the trunk over the course of the clip. This explicit method of coaching delivered in smaller progressive components allowed the athlete to develop declarative knowledge regarding each limb action during the movement. To such an extent, the athlete was able to repeat the verbal cues he had been given concerning each limb action. The character of these verbal instructions were varied concerning attentional focus, containing both external and internal cues. The following clip highlights how these cues varied.
Double rebound that we're looking for on this stance leg is a nice triple extension. Okay, so your calf slapping into the ground, nice forceful contact, push off the ground, yeah. You're going to be straight calf, straight knee, straight hip. On the other side again, you've got good swing leg recovery, so there's a high knee drive, and that foot is coming up your leg, it's not coming out. So imagine there's a marker pen on the inside of your shoe, and you're drawing a line up that straight leg. Okay?
This slide shows the range of cues used in the footage, broken down into internal and external focus of attention. As you can see, I adopted a mixed approach using both methods of cueing. The external cues relating to interactions with the environment, or as used as analogies in part, which I'll later discuss, and also internal cues where the focus of attention is directed towards the body. Now, the literature around attentional focus has repeatedly evidenced that cues with an external focus produce superior performance when compared to internal cues. However, it must be said that a lot of this research has been centered around explosive tasks such as jumping, sprinting and throwing. However, a drill such as the A-skip does not have a maximal explosive intent, but is focused more towards desirable mechanics of limb segments that may transfer in part to running performance. In this instance, I believe with novice performers there needs to be a grounding in explicit instruction that may be delivered through these intrinsic cues, so that we can improve the athlete's affordances and perceptions of the desired outcome of the task. Although this might result in less objective outcomes such as lower force production, it may improve the aesthetics of the movement, which may then establish motor patterns to facilitate greater force production in future training. Therefore, I think the balance of the cues pitched to this novice performer were in part a reason for successful outcomes. The next big question begs, how could this verbal delivery of coaching information be improved? Here are the list of cues again as heard on the footage. Now, although a variety of cues were used, I think the clarity of their delivery could be improved. As you can see, some are quite vague in their interaction with either the environment or the body. Quite frequently, I fail to reference the ground or the body segment I'm referring to. Without the use of practical demonstrations and gestures, this might become quite confusing for the athlete. In this next slide, I have modified the cues as highlighted in green to give better clarity and context to the athlete with reference to the environment or self, which may result in more effective transfer. It is also obvious from this list that I didn't use clear analogies. In part, I referenced the spring-like action of getting off the ground, here highlighted in blue. I think this analogy could be further developed as an external cue and give more meaning to the athlete when expressing force into the ground, with that elastic energy being returned during the flight. This could be phrased with more clarity as the following analogy. Imagine your legs are springs. After you hit the ground, spring off it. An additional coaching cue that I used quite frequently but also to good effect was repeatedly using the phrase snap as an external cue for a forceful ground contact. This seemed to have multiple applications, firstly as an external cue for movement, but also as auditory intrinsic feedback to the athlete who could associate a good ground contact with a louder noise. Continuing on this topic of feedback, I delivered augmented feedback in the form of knowledge of performance. This was given at the end of the session and not after every component of coaching. While this may be quite minimalist, there is evidence from a study by Wolf in 2002 to suggest that less frequent feedback can be as effective or even more effective than feedback after every repetition. Ultimately, the coaching intervention was successful, so this may have been an appropriate level. Finally, when reflecting on the volume and delivery of coaching, I think this highlights the most room for improvement. I often use multiple cues for a movement consecutively and delivered a lot of different cues for different segments in a short period of time. This is a lot for the athlete to process and may compromise their understanding of the movement, especially with more novice performers. To improve my verbal communication, I need to give clear, systematic instructions to move, whilst using the single most effective cue for a key movement, and maintaining feedback at appropriate volume and time. Importantly, this information needs to be concise and delivered with clarity, but also pitched appropriately when considering athlete experience. And that brings an end to my vlog. Thank you for watching.